A quick warning, this video will contain spoilers on the following pieces of media. This is the story of a commander deck that I built for Eluge the Shoreless Sea. But to me, it represents more than just the cardboard game pieces we know and love. Under the surface, each card is a memento. They reveal different influences from my past that shape the way I enjoy fantasy. And more importantly, this game we call Magic the Gathering. In a way, this deck is the culmination of every daydream I've spent exploring the mysterious deep blue. So let me share this with you. Let me bring you on a journey to a world beneath the waves. In 2001, the British Broadcasting Channel released a nature documentary titled The Blue Planet. It was an all-encompassing 8-episode series that showcased the diversity of oceanic life. Quite literally exploring uncharted waters, the researchers and biologists behind Blue Planet were able to capture mesmerizing behaviors in marine animals that had never been caught on camera prior. When I first watched Blue Planet in 2011, my younger self sat enamored. Eyes glued to the screen, I was mystified by the complexity and beauty of life in the ocean, while the soothing voice of Sir David Attenborough served as my tour guide through this underwater dimension. But nothing ensnared my attention more than Episode 2, The Deep. Fantastical, horrifying, almost eldritch-like creatures unlike anything near the surface thrived and grew to enormous proportions, despite the seemingly inhospitable environments of the deep ocean. These images seized the imagination of my younger self, and sparked my eventual obsession for exploring the realm of the aquatic in art, film, and entertainment. 13 years later, I was at my local game store participating in the Bloomborough pre-release. As I was tearing through my booster packs, I saw this. Emerging from the wave were enormous gaping jaws of a creature whose size the inhabitants of the plane could only begin to fathom. This painting by artist Chase Stone illustrates everything that the deep had enraptured me with years prior. It instilled such an ominous atmosphere, a healthy dosage of fear. But beyond all that remained a sense of allure and wonder. Sitting in that LGS, a wave of nostalgia washed over me as I began to daydream about constructing a deck that could express the layers of influences and imagination that seeing this painting stirred in me. Like many people, I fell in love with the plane of Bloomborough right away. Veteran enjoyers of the game felt that this new set was a return to form from Wizards of the Coast, and that it was the best world that they had designed in a long time. I was obsessed with the concept of the Calamity beasts, whose presence forever poses an existential threat to the inhabitants of Bloomborough. I had to know more about them. I sought out any scraps of lore that could give me insight to better flesh out this creature that had come to possess me. In The Legends of Bloomborough, writer Neil Johnson develops the lore of the plane. He provides backstories and journal entries for different characters and creatures. In Eluge's entry, Alania Divergent Storm describes the serpent. As the abyssal jaws of Eluge breach the ponds, the waves seem endless, and each thrash of its tail is a tidal current that threatens to rip roots from soil. Bloomborough Episode 3 of the Magic Story podcast titled The Lost and the Found, and written by Valerie Valdez, dives further into Eluge's role in the canonical narrative. Helga Skittish Seer, along with Mabel, Phineas, Hugs, Gev, and Zoraline, make their way to Three Tree City, searching for clues about the abnormal behavior of the Calamity Beast Maha, as well as murmurings about a character known as Cruel Claw. After being interrogated by Ralzeric, the group try to refocus on their mission, when suddenly... a sinuous form moved below the water surface, silver scales glinting in the dappled sunlight. Unlike minnows and guppies, this fish was so long Mabel couldn't see its tail or even its dorsal fin. Magical markings glowed along its side, their rosy hue warped by the roiling currents. A huge wave lifted the creature so it loomed above the docklands. Baleful eyes burned with power, and a long mouth gaped to reveal rows of wickedly sharp teeth. The towering wave crashed into the docklands of Three Tree City, and the pull of the long river washed the group downstream, where they eventually came ashore near the entrance to the Knowledge Ossuary. The episode ended here, and the Bloomborough story continues. But Eluge would not make an appearance for the rest of this tale. This brief encounter only left me wanting more. But until Wizards decides to revisit the plane, all I had left was my imagination. On Bloomborough, the arrival of colossal calamity beasts signal the changing of the seasons and weather. As part of this eternal cycle, Eluge's arrival marks the dawn of the season of deep waters. However, Eluge is not simply a creature that lives on the plain to bring flooding to the valley. Rather, Eluge's creation, to me, feels tied to the plain's magic. In Greek myth, Persephone's cyclical return and departure signify the changing seasons. To the Greeks, she is the embodiment of spring and vegetation. Her presence on the surface brought flourishing, and her departure caused Demeter to let the world go barren. The Calamity Beasts fill a similar role for the animal folk. But Bloomborough, in its primitive and primal stages, didn't need to rely on myth. The wild elemental powers on the plain manifested in the form of Eluge, to provide the animal folk a physical embodiment of arriving storms and floods. This is the reason for Eluge and the other Calamity Beasts' elemental subtype. Further, flood myths, sometimes known as deluge myths, are part of many cultures throughout history. In these tales, great floods arrive to destroy entire civilizations. They symbolize acts of divine retribution, or serve as catalysts for society to start anew. Either way, these tales undoubtedly helped inspire Eluge and the other Calamity Beasts' design, as they all embody destructive forces that allow them to reshape the earth, and gives another reasoning for their deity-like status on the plane. Eluge and the Calamity Beasts ultimately represent the balance between nature and civilization. The Long River, inhabited by Eluge, provides a continuous source of water, food, and transportation for the thriving civilizations along its shore. In exchange for the river's abundance, the looming threat of eventual flooding restricts the animal folk from domesticating too much of the river's territory. The river provides, and as a result, the animal folk learn not to take the river for granted. Eluge the Shoreless Sea captures the ebb and flow relationship between anticipation and arrival, arcane and allegorical, annihilation and aftermath. This is what I wanted to articulate through deck building. Realizing this deck would be a challenging process of balancing both flavor and performance. This project is also continuously evolving. as I discover cards both old and new that further materialize my abstract thoughts. Since starting to work on this video, I've altered the deck many times as I revised both the script and my perspective on the creature. After months of deliberation, I finally settled on this list, which I am making this video about now. In the coming years, this deck will undoubtedly continue to morph and evolve. However, one unchanging pillar about this deck building philosophy is that I wanted the many inspirations behind it to guide my design decisions. Drawing on Blue Planet, for example, I wanted the deck to be able to summon the monstrous denizens of the deep to help aggrandize Eluge's Calamity. This project was never about constructing the most streamlined pub stomper, but rather something much more personal that I could reminisce on each time I riffled through it. Selecting the most appropriate art for each card was of great importance, and cards that were unable to elicit the specific mood I wanted didn't make the cut. Without further ado, let's talk about some Magic cards. The lands provide the groundwork for Eluge's narrative, as they paint the environments in which our tale unfolds. I like to think of them as theatrical backdrops, each showing different story beats while also conveying different qualities of what makes these aquatic worlds so tantalizing. For the basic lands, I chose Alexander Forsberg's Island from Bloomborough. It depicts an overflowing creek, creating a stream that rushes past a small deserted encampment. The spillover may not seem relevant, but it foreshadows the events that will play out at a much larger scale. For more plane-focused lore building, I included Lilypad Village, again by Alexander Forsberg. Even though its third ability only works with one creature in the deck, I felt it important to add landscapes from across Bloomborough. Speaking of which, here is Fountainport by Leon Tucker, a multifunctional utility land in addition to its story importance. Fountainport is the city ruled over by one of Bloomborough's main antagonists, King Glarb, who sought to control his own Calamity beast by stealing the egg of Maha, its feather's knight. His actions, along with the infamous Cruel Claw, are the main reason for the Calamity beast's outrage in the Bloomborough story. Out of the other utility lands, I wanted to highlight a couple. Mystic Sanctuary by Randy Vargas depicts a lake with such tranquil ambiance it feels as though it could never be disturbed. Mechanically, it allows us to fetch back important spells and is a beloved staple in Dandan. Miko Koro, Center of the Sea by John Avon depicts a crystal island that, to me, resembles the head of a giant leviathan breaching the surface of the water. His painting is so reminiscent of The Great Flood by Bonaventure Peters the Elder. The darker waves frame the rays of sun beaming down from the sky, signaling the presence of a greater power at work. Similarly, in John Avon's painting, the silhouette of the landscape frames the island, the beams of light signifying the shrine's spiritual importance. Arcane Lighthouse by Igor Kiriluk was a must include, a lighthouse being a crucial piece of infrastructure to combat the stormy seas. The lighthouse also harbors a more sinister side. In Robert Eggers' 2019 film, The Lighthouse, an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's unfinished work by the same name, he envisions how the effects of isolation and mundanity drive the two lighthouse keepers to insanity. As the madness begins to set in, Winslow's mind begins to wander. This movie is full of themes of mythology and superstition, and ultimately it is the disbelief in such superstition that brings the storm leading to their demise. Coral Atoll by John Avon, Halimar Depths by Volkan Baga, and Sunken Palace by Julian Kokjun Wen bring to mind images of civilizations that fell victim to such storms and rising waters. Perhaps most famously among them, Atlantis. My first encounter with the legendary Lost City was in Jules Verne's 1870 novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Plenty of media have tried to portray the sunken city, glorifying it as some sort of underwater utopia. Byrne describes it closer to Plato's true intentions, in its state of crumbling hubris. My favorite land is Magosi the Watervale by Eric Deschamps. It's a strange land that allows us to take an extra turn if we pay the cost of skipping one earlier in the game. This painting transports me. Its warm and iridescent qualities mimic the spray of glistening mist in the humid tropical air. The white foam conveys the movement and cacophony of crashing waters our ears could only begin to imagine at a waterfall this grandiose. This painting specifically kindles a deep desire for discovery, akin to the effect those nature documentaries had on me many years prior. What other lands remain to be uncovered? One of the most crucial parts in uncovering and explaining narratives in both real life and magic are artifacts. They reveal traditions and rich histories, important symbolism and beliefs. Sky Diamond by Lindsay Look depicts a multitude of small cascading falls. In the foreground, a jewel bestowed by the heavens that sparkles like a pool of water. Always meeting at the horizon, sea and sky are inseparable, and this crystal symbolizes that deep connection. Maha's rage in the valley drove the other Calamity beasts as well, notably our titular fish Eluge in its attack on Three Tree City. One threat descending from the sky, and another rising from the sea. Decanter of Endless Water by Titus Lunter is a curio from the Dungeons & Dragons franchise, capable of producing exorbitant amounts of water on command. In the context of Bloomborough, perhaps it is a magical relic symbolic of the unending floods during the season of deep waters. Other artifacts in the deck include Strionic Resonator by Noah Bradley, a cryptic monument that I imagine would produce a deep and reverberating tone, channeling the feeling of the dark and open ocean. We often associate these deep tones with ocean acoustics due to the nature of how sound travels through water. Game designers are aware of this and use it to their advantage, to unsettle us. Producing a more familiar sound is Fountain Port Bell by Nestor Osondenleel. It represents an important part of the animal folk's defense mechanisms, a way to warn the town of approaching threats. This menagerie of artifacts serve to illustrate the impending and inevitable disaster that Eluge represents. Counterspells have been around since the inception of magic, and have a rich, iterative design history. Stylistically, these nullification spells are often depicted with vortexes, waves, tendrils, and mists. This is embodied by the turbulent churn of elemental energy in the Long River. I imagine the mists of the riverbank disperse hostilities into ether. The mist dissolves, it fragments, taking what energy is thrown at it and refracting it in a million directions. And at the same time, the fog bank pushes back not because it's physically stopping us, but perhaps because we simply cannot imagine what lies beyond. How can you fight that which you cannot see? Sometimes things fight their way through the counter magic, but the river is relentless. Bounce spells represent the physicality of the river, the roiling current that pushes back against the intruders who try to conquer the river's domain. The card that represents this to a T is Inundate by Mark Zug, whose flavor text reads, "For years the landfolk have emptied their refuse into the waters. It's time to return the favor." It perfectly encapsulates the perpetual conflict between land and sea. When I first saw Coastal Breach by Titus Lunter, I was frozen in fear. It transported me back to when I was a kid, watching the tsunami scene from The Day After Tomorrow at a science museum. At the time, I was unable to distinguish between real life and science fiction, and I was haunted by dreams of towering waves and being unable to run away. Those scenes taught my younger self to fear the power of the tide. On the other hand, Engulf the Shore by Cliff Childs appeals to my older self's fascinations. It likewise depicts an imposing and unstoppable wave, but in this case, the water seems to be the least of the landfolk's worries. Other well-suited cards include River's Rebuke by Raymond Swanland, Capsize by Tom Wannerstrand, and my personal favorite, Washout by Stephen Belladin. The gray stone pillars emblematic of eons of tides eroding away at the rock and its pigment. This card also exhibits another aspect of Eluge's narrative. Unendingly a part of Bloomburrow's cycle of change, Eluge's arrival is a phenomenon that might only occur once in a generation. Existing as a part of nature, time might pass differently for the Calamity Beast. 100 years might only be a flicker in Eluge's existence on the plane. As such, the role of extra turn spells is to collapse the amount of time everyone else must experience in order for the season of deep waters to arrive once more. The first card I've chosen is Part the Water Veil, again by Titus Lunter. The Water Veil refers back to Magosi, the all-important waterfall for the nomads and traders of Zendikar. Zendikar's volatile energies reshape the landscapes, much like the Calamity Beasts. Flowing water is often used to symbolize the passage of time, and thus to part the water veil would be analogous to manipulating time itself. My favorite extra turn spell is Walk the Eons by Jeremy Jarvis. It allows you to pay a steep buyback cost in order to walk time over and over again. The immense toll of such repeated time manipulation is expressed in the artwork through the strained posture of the three figures, as they attempt to control the unwavering pendulum of time. The figures in this artwork are a nod to the original extra turn spell, Time Walk by Amy Weber. One card that I absolutely must talk about for being a triumph in everything flavor, artwork, and functionality is Daydream by Niels Hahn. Certainly an eternal slumber is one way to pass the time between Eluge's sporadic appearances in the Bloomborough waters. The painting also captures the hypnotic, trance-like state of a beast, forced to be part of the never-ending cycle of meaningless destruction. The stretches of time existing in its mind only as a hazy and nebulous memory. In practice, Daydream benefits greatly as you accumulate more flood counters. Eluge's discount covers the splice cost, allowing us to turn our cheaper spells into cantrips, netting us more and more resources while keeping Daydream in our hand. Speaking of gathering resources, being such an abundant resource for food and a course for commerce, the Long River provides for the settlements of Bloomborough in many ways. In-game, this abundance translates directly to card draw. The cards I wanted to highlight are Flow of Ideas by Mike Dringenberg, Flow of Knowledge by Tongyeon Chu, Mind Spring by Mark Zug, and Research the Deep by Eric Fortune. The first three reward us for having more lands in play, and the first two mechanically tying into Eluge putting flood counters on our non-islands. Research the Deep channels the feeling of insatiable curiosity. Each time the clash reveals a sea monster off the top, more often than not we'll return Research the Deep to our hand, allowing us to dive deeper. The deeper we go, the more we think we'll learn, the more prepared we will feel. But sometimes we come to realize how out of our depth we are. Perhaps it's best to leave some things undiscovered. Among these four cards, Mind Spring is my favorite. The flavor text just reads so lyrically. Fragments of thought refract and multiply, surging in a geyser of dizzying insight. The concept of metaphorically relating insight and memory to overflowing water is not rare in Magic's design flavor. I think the card that showcases this best is Mnemonic Deluge by Chris Rallis. The flavor text plays into our themes of time and memory, and other words into our ideas of water. The word mnemonic as an adjective means aiding the memory, or helping you to remember. And in the illustration, the literal deluge of rain makes tangible the feeling of memories pouring into your mind. The expression on the wizard's face shows a total submission to the power of the flood. There is no use in resisting the inevitable. When the river overflows, we want to bring the flood to every part of the battlefield. I've included Spreading Seas by Jung Pak, Sea's Claim by Thomas Gianni, and Lingering Mirage by Jerry Turritelli. These soft hate pieces help us deal with problematic lands that our opponents control. I love the simple flavor of these cards, flooding our opponents' lands in water so deep, turning what remains of them into islands. I'd love to see Gaia overcome the power of a little rain. As the saying goes, there is always the calm before the storm. Reading the telltale signs of the disaster to come is a crucial practice for many folk on Bloomborough. Evoking this anticipation is the aptly named Leyline of Anticipation by Matteo Bassini, as well as Ominous Seas by Vincent Pross, and Fortune Teller's Talent by Jarrell Threet. Fortune Teller's Talent is our in-plane future sight effect, and an important part of Bloomborough's storytelling. Frogfolk who have mastered weaving after the great wars of the past use their talents in augury, a practice rooted in Greco-Roman culture that involved interpreting bird patterns as omens, and whimsically referenced in the flavor text of the card Murmuration. In human history, the Roman augurs tried to decipher the will of the gods. Not too dissimilarly, on Bloomborough, augury is used to predict the wandering paths of the Calamity beasts. Leyline of Anticipation lets us summon Eluge at instant speed, paralleling the Bloomburrow story episode where Eluge's arrival catches the heroes off guard. Leylines are a curious piece of pseudoscience. They are invisible, theoretical lines that join significant landmarks throughout the world and are believed to hold spiritual and earthly energies. These energies are strongest at the intersection of different ley lines, as expressed in the original leyline cycle from Guild Pact. Each of them represent the convergence of core beliefs in their respective color identity. Fortune-telling as an art form exists for us to seek certainty in an uncertain world. But too often is the trope that we meet our fate on the path we take to avoid it. King Glarb was tormented by visions of Bloomburrow's ruin, and in trying to protect the valley, he brought upon the Calamity. For Leyline of Anticipation, then, I feel that it represents the convergence of insight and ego. The most evocative and powerful of these acts of anticipation is Harbinger of the Seas by Winona Nelson. Reminding me of cult-like doomsayers present in every portrayal of the apocalypse, Harbinger of the Seas acts as Eluge's lackey, extending the reach of the river in preparation for Eluge's arrival. Finally, to encapsulate the Swell is High Tide by Amy Weber. Although this more modern painting by Mark Simonetti might be more iconic, Amy Weber's version has an eerie tranquility to it, bearing semblance to this scene from Studio Ghibli's Ponyo. Is that moon really on the horizon? Or did the water swell high enough to swallow the sky? The tsunami in Ponyo engulfs the land with all manner of aquatic life, juxtaposing them against habitats unfamiliar to them, but home to us. Amy Weber's paintings suggest that a similar phenomenon is on the brink. In the Bloomburrow story, Eluge's breach on Three Tree City ended with a devastating flood. But I wanted more. I wanted the takeover of land by sea to bring the imagined horrors of the deep out of the shadows. Creatures so vast, their size alone are enough to generate disaster. Nothing represents this better than Colossal Whale by Adam Paquette. A creature so unimaginably large that its head is enough to block out the sky. Its mechanic conjures the image of its enormous mouth swallowing entire fleets of ships and sinking back into the sea. Some people like to speculate that we know more about space than we do the ocean. Nothing quite captures the existential dread of the immeasurable, like Charik's The Raging Isle by Kekai Kotaki. How can a creature like this exist? What does it prey upon? What preys upon it? What else lurks in that bottomless abyss? Scourge of Fleets is a grotesque amalgamation conceived in the mind of Stephen Belladin. His painting is an homage to one of the most famous pieces of thalassophobia, Jaws. It is perhaps the most monstrous of the cards so far, with a horrifying tooth-filled maw, and claws that look proportionally small, but when referenced to the ship above and the shark swimming by its side, the enormity of the creature becomes apparent. Inkwell Leviathan by Anthony Francisco is a bit off flavor being an artifact creature, but it is such a foreboding painting that I couldn't exclude it. The true scale of this creature and the waves it creates are hard to comprehend until you see the little lighthouse sticking out amidst the raging sea. I really appreciate what Belladin and Francisco have done. Both describe the difficulty of trying to capture the sheer size of their respective creatures in painting, until they gave the viewer something to reference. These reference objects are meant to feel safe. A seaworthy vessel, a lighthouse. but when illustrated in conjunction with these monstrosities, the illusion of familiarity vanishes completely. As an aside, Stephen Belladin also writes that, had he remembered sooner, he would have used the painting to pay tribute to one of his all-time favorite magic images, Drew Tucker's Dan Dan. I cannot imagine how horrifying it must be to look overboard and see nothing but the void of this creature's mouth. My favorite inclusion is Stormtide Leviathan by Karl Kopinski. A creature seemingly too large to be this close to the shore, its thrashing movements making utter playthings of the ships at bay. The design is full of flavor. The Leviathan's proximity to the coast brings with it such immense volumes of water. What remains of the landscape are but remnants of peaks surrounded by the sea. This new flooded terrain is inhospitable for creatures who cannot traverse it. Nature does not halt. It does not care that you are in its path. As we dredge these creatures out of the deep, they relentlessly crash indifferently into whatever happens to be ashore. The forces of nature finally bringing about the annihilation as prophesied by Eluge's arrival. In the wake of the destruction, there are recovery efforts to be made. Some characters act as guides to the new floodplain, helping bring those who are washed away back to safety, or perhaps guiding those lost at sea into the afterlife. Some begrudgingly take up their typical post at work, overwhelmed by the influx of people seeking shelter. And some fend for themselves, taking advantage of what others have lost to make a little gain for themselves. The flood is ephemeral, and as the tide recedes, all that is left of the water's presence is the tinge of vapor in the air and the absence of what it's washed away. These subtle moments where staring at still images can invent miniature stories, reflect scenes from film, and bring back memories of the past, is what led me to fall in love with Magic the Gathering in its entirety. And as amazing as the Magic story writers and world builders are, I enjoy taking the liberties of adapting what they provide into a story of my own, even if it sometimes isn't exactly lore accurate. To me, that is what makes the Commander format so special. It is a miniature mobile gallery, full of each person's passions, of what brought them into the folds of this wizard dueling game we call Magic the Gathering. Thank you for reaching the end of this video. Editing my first ever video was a challenging process, and it took a couple months of work getting this out the door. So if this video appealed to you in any way, and you'd like to see more, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. This project felt less like deck building and more like museum curation. I found that it allowed me to enjoy Magic from a different and more enjoyable perspective. Amidst all the recent outcries about how Magic is quote-unquote dead, it felt good to make something about everything I love about the game. I didn't want to cover every card in the deck since I felt it would take too much time. You can find the full deck list in the Architect link below. Feel free to leave any card suggestions in the comments or any criticisms about my subpar deck building. Shout out to the Eluge Discord and the Blue Mages who are always on the lookout for new weapons to add to Eluge's toolkit. A link to join that server will be in the description. Also, be sure to check out all of the mentioned artists' pages. Links will be below. Without them, this game we love would be much more bland. They help bring our fantasy worlds to life. I wanted to mention some other important pieces of media that helped inspire this video. If you've somehow found me and don't know about the channel Ristic Studies, check out his absolute masterclasses of video essays about Magic the Gathering. He provides wonderful histories about all aspects of this game we love. His Dan Dan video certainly appealed to my affinity for blue. He also recently wrote a blog post talking about his video making process, which helped me make the final push to getting this video done. If you're hungry for some more deep sea adventures, go watch Jacob Geller's video about fear of big things underwater, as well as Pancake's video on their favorite depictions of the Kraken. I want to thank my first grade teacher for having 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea on her advanced reading bookshelf. If I hadn't wanted to prove my reading prowess to the rest of the class who couldn't care less, I might have never read that book and fell in love with the majesty of aquatic life. And lastly, thank you to David Attenborough for being the voice of my childhood, guiding me through magical worlds that sparked within me the essence of wonder. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has to thank you for that experience. As a final word, be sure to stay tuned for next time, where I will be doing a video on the art of the top deck.